The real democracy delusion. What is the democracy delusion? How can democracy be a delusion? We all vote, don't we? We put our leaders into power, don't we? This channel was set up to expose one of the biggest lies in modern history. That is, what we call democracy is actually not democracy at all. In fact, it isn't even close. So what is democracy, and where does it come from? Democracy emerged around 500 BC in Athens, the most powerful city-state in ancient Greece. Athens was the home of Socrates, arguably one of the most important philosophers of all time. Athens was also the home of Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum. It was widely referred to as the cradle of Western civilization. The vast majority of the great philosophers can trace their roots back to this period. The term comes from the original Greek demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. Other Greek cities set up democracies also, but the Athenian model being the predominant choice. But Athens was by far the most stable and the most dominant. It remains to this day a unique example of a direct democracy. Participation was by no means open, of course, but those chosen to participate were selected from right across the economic spectrum, and participation occurred on a scale that is unprecedented. Even though the Athenian democracy was suppressed by the Macedonians in 322 BC, it was later revived, but to the extent to which it could be considered a real democracy is widely debated by scholars. Since this period, democracy has spread through the world to most, if not all, the so-called civilized Western societies. Millions and millions of people worldwide participate in this process. Democracy is an umbrella term that simply means the people choose. A republic is a type of democracy. This is why, when you hear people say the words, "America is not a democracy, it is a republic," they are really making no sense. Most of them really mean, America is not a direct democracy, and we have a constitution and laws, etc. Most of these things that people think they love about their republic aren't even specific to republics at all. There is no reason why a direct democracy cannot have a constitution, or a Bill of Rights, or a law code. The only difference between direct democracy and a republic is that in a republic you choose a representative to speak on your behalf, whereas in a direct democracy you speak for yourself. Both systems have drawbacks and limitations, and we will be discussing the merits of both systems in the next series. Untold millions have given their lives to protect and defend the principle of democracy. On the face of it, democracy, in the form of a republic, seems to be an ideal system. The people vote a representative into office to make their will known, and the representative takes the grievances of the people to be heard before the government. So, whatever happens, ultimately, is the will of the people, right? Wrong. Unfortunately, this system is festooned with backdoors and openings, giving anyone so motivated to simply exploit the system for financial gain. In England, the Bank of England, formerly the Governor and Company of the Bank of England, was established in 1694. England and France were at war, and just 4 years earlier, after a crushing naval defeat at the Battle of Beachy Head, the coffers were drained, and England's image as a military power was in tatters. William Paterson had only 3 years before this proposed a plan to Charles Montague, 1st Earl of Halifax, whereby a loan could be secured to the government for a figure of 1.2 million. In return, the subscribers would be incorporated as the Governor and Company of the Bank of England, with long-term banking privileges, including the issue of notes. The Royal Charter was granted on July the 27th, through the passage of the Tonnage Act of 1694. The English finances were so dire at this stage that the loan was secured at 8%, with a service charge of £4,000 per annum. The first governor was Sir John Holborn, depicted in the 1994 £50 notes. In 1775 in America, the money supply from England had almost entirely dried up, and the colonies were struggling to facilitate trade. So they came up with a simple but ingenious solution. They started printing their own money. Now, unlike the legitimate English currency, the new American money was issued without being indebted to the institution that issued it. More important to understand still, it was not indebted to the institutions back home, and by now most of Europe, that controlled the money supply. This action saw the British colonies enjoy a period of economic prosperity that was truly unparalleled in the world, comparing only to Rome when Julius Caesar did the very same thing. Over the next few hundred years, control over the money supply was hotly fought over. A centralised bank was set up and then later removed. At the turn of the century, the banking cartel swept in with a brilliant piece of legal trickery and took over control of the money supply, and in doing this, they secured their position as absolute, if not clandestine, rulers supreme. After all, what power do you have against families that own nearly half the world's wealth, control and monopolise global resources like oil, gold, and control and produce the very money we all use? In the 1930s, a German politician called Joseph Goebbels rose to power, along with the Nazi Party, and he was appointed propaganda minister. Now, Goebbels did not invent propaganda by any means, but he did have one particularly notable contribution. Goebbels' greatest contribution to the art of propaganda was probably the perfecting of the big lie technique. The big lie technique is a very simple concept. It is basically the idea that if you tell a lie so big, so extreme, and repeat it enough times, it will be believed. Goebbels instigated a program banning books rejected by the Nazis, and seized total control over virtually every area of the media. Goebbels used the techniques he and his associates invented and developed to psychologically prepare the German people for the war to come. A war that employed new technologies like mechanized warfare and new aircraft to project a power that had never been seen before. It was believed that the new armaments, ordnance, and delivery systems would be so effective that any power that stood against them would be crushed in a lightning attack. Hence the term blitzkrieg, or lightning war. The direction of the lie was aimed mostly at Germans' ethnic and political minorities. Minorities rejected and often despised by Hitler and the inner circle of the Nazi echelons of power. The lie was a remarkably simple and effective device. It basically stated certain groups were working to destroy Germany from the inside out. This was all the justification they needed to mobilize. And finally, this culminated in the Holocaust, the final solution, where all those deemed unsuitable for breeding and inferior were simply shipped off and worked to death in prison camps, or simply exterminated. Sound familiar? Exactly. It's the same device the governments have been using to demonize the communists in Russia, in Asia during Vietnam, the Cubans during the Bay of Pigs, demonizing Islam in the Middle East. Just about anything and everything they deem to be a viable target for a campaign of fear gets the spin treatment. It is also the same justification they used to set up torture camps in Guantanamo Bay, where detainees were held indefinitely without trial. June 6, the Allied forces stormed the beach at Normandy and gained a foothold in France. At this time, the great German general Rommel was away on holiday, believing the measures and defences he had put into place to prohibit amphibious assault to be impenetrable. Operation Overlord, as it was codenamed, consisted of airborne divisions numbering in excess of 12,000 planes. The Navy numbered more than 7,000 vessels, and the main assault consisted of 160,000 men. By the end of August, the Allies had over 3 million troops in France. Even though the war had already begun to turn against the Nazis and their allies, Goebbels increased the propaganda and finally called for total war. The death toll during World War II was unlike anything the world has ever seen. They called the First World War a war to end all wars. Unfortunately, while the profit incentive is in place, there will never be an end to war. After the end of World War II, the so-called civilized victorious West began implementing the very same techniques through the printing press, radio broadcasts, and using new film and editing techniques invented by Edison's understudy Edwin Porter, developed by D.W. Griffith, and the Russian filmmakers Sergei and Elizabeth Vertov, Lev Kuleshov, Sergei Eisenstein, and used to remarkable effect by director Leni Riefenstahl to turn Adolf Hitler into a god in The Triumph of the Will. The level of propaganda the powers that be could level against the public at large was truly phenomenal. The Allies may have won the war, but sadly, the tools for manipulation en masse could not be unmade. They were here to stay. The institutions that controlled the so-called democracy, that all those brave souls fought and died to defend, were now so entrenched it would take right up to present day to expose the degree of their treachery. Democracy was now the tool of choice for the ruling elite and the financial oligarchy to sit at the head of the table. And the system of control, persuasion and manipulation, so tenacious in nature, was now in place that even when the lies are patently obvious, the people did not act. It borrowed from the last 3,000 years or more and encompassed all the latest technology, utilised a scientific psychological approach, and every facet was perfected to such a degree that the media would go largely unchallenged. Until now. Corruption within our political system is inbuilt from the top down. Unless we start to recognise this fact, and the mechanisms that are utilised, and then implement ways limiting the acquisition of wealth, there will never be freedom on earth. So this group will now attempt to elaborate on the problem in this introductory series, before Series 2, in which we would like to suggest ways we can improve the system dramatically, or even replace it altogether. Now it is easy to attack figures like Goebbels and Hitler, and it is right that we should do this, but in all fairness, if they had succeeded in their plans, they might in years to come have been remembered alongside names such as Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. Great political strategists, military leaders with great visions. Now Hitler was none of these things, but ultimately it wouldn't matter. When the millions that died in their wars are forgotten, only the future they helped to shape would be remembered and venerated. And that is the problem. If peace breaks out all over the Middle East and the populations of Libya, Egypt, Iran and the like rise up and claim democracy, individuals like Tony Blair and George Bush will be remembered as heroes, not the tyrants and war criminals they actually were. The millions who died needlessly and the trillions looted from the economy, and all the other nations that were made to starve and suffer in subjugation, will be nothing but a distant memory, long since forgotten, a statistic that people will rationalise weighs against the supposed good that this helped to bring about. And those who really orchestrate the whole system remain in the shadows, the generals you can't see, the politicians behind the veil. They are the invisible dictator. They cannot be demonized exactly because they are unseen. It is time for this to end. It is time to shine a light on the filth behind the body politic, and recognize the hidden hand that truly operates the levers of power. It is time for these individuals to be shown for what they are and vilified. It is time for them to answer for what they have done and what they are planning to do.